going because we're going to be talking about how we can choose to do anything today. So let's see. I'm going to get started here. So we're going to talk today about how we can exercise our personal power to create both the kind of life that we want to experience, but also the kind of life that I think everybody would like to experience. We're going to talk about what that might look like. But one thing that we know as we begin is that this life, as Mary said in her meditation, is something that begins with that presence of the divine within us. It originates within us because we are expressions of God, and it moves through us in the form of integrity and accountability and being true to our values. So Jimmy Carter, who recently celebrated his 100th birthday, devoted his life after his presidency to living in accord with his values. And this included a commitment to working with Habitat for Humanity, the organization that builds affordable housing. And for many years, he has committed a week of his life, not just to supporting Habitat for Humanity financially, but actually building. And he and his wife, Rosalind, did this together until her death recently. And he's no longer able to do it, but he did it for many years. And what, to me, this embodies is a really amazing and inspiring example of choosing to live in accord with your values. So not simply having values that you walk around with in your head, right? Or even values that you are supporting with money. I mean, that's awesome if you have it to do that with. But actually taking action. And that's the kind of action that we're going to talk about today, the kind of power that we're going to talk about today. So what is power? Right? We think about power in a couple of different ways. We think about kind of culturally, we often think of our power as having power over others, right? And we often kind of struggle in our culture in feeling powerless as individuals. Does anybody ever feel powerless? Yeah, I certainly have. And yet, we have a very amazing power. It is the power to choose what we are going to do. And we have that power in every single moment that we choose to be aware of it, right? So our annual theme this year has been this idea of a grand rising. And the idea of this grand rising is that in CSL and in New Thought more generally, but really as human beings, we can choose to focus on our growth individually, but also on how we can work together, how we can rise up together and support each other in the process of both learning how to make our own individual lives better from a spiritual standpoint, but also how we can support each other as fellow human beings, right? And as we do the work that we are called to do, right, we begin to learn how to express this power that we're all born with power and authenticity, with integrity and authenticity. So last week, Reverend Angela spoke with us about this divine power within, how to recognize it, how to connect with it, right? And she invited us to think about the spiritual practice that we could begin the day with, right? Which would be to simply take a moment at the beginning of the day to center ourselves, to connect with that divine within, and to ask the question, right? What is mine to do today? What do I need to know today? And she even gave us kind of a great physical practice, right? To kind of open up that top chakra on your head, to sort of open up that space and see what might come through, what might download from spirit. And she also gave us a tool to kind of discern that, right? So she said, well, what if you're worried? Is this really spirit talking? Is this my fears or false beliefs or something else? And she said, the way you can tell is, does this thought, this idea, this action bring more life, more good to my life and the lives of others or not? If it brings good, then yes, we can have confidence that this is spirit, present. What a powerful idea that when we stop, when we do that pause, that we can bring ourselves into alignment and congruence with spiritual values, but also creating that life that we would like to experience. Ernest Holmes once said, when asked what to pray for, we can pray for anything that brings more life and harms no one. Right? That's when you know that that prayer is in alignment with spiritual value. So as you all know, I always like to start by referencing one of our foundational principles in science of mind. So today, I'd like to start with saying this one. We believe that the ultimate goal of life to be a complete emancipation from all discord of every nature, and that this goal is sure to be attained by all. Okay. Does this sound kind of like what Joe referenced in his song, like a whack job universe? Because, you know, we look around right now at this moment, there is plenty of discord to go around, isn't there? And that's discouraging, right? And yet we propose this as a fundamental belief that the goal of life is to have a complete emancipation from all discord. So I invite you to close your moment. Let me try that again. Close your eyes for a moment and simply imagine for a moment, what might that look like? What would a world without discord look like and feel like to you? All right, so just take that feeling tone into your body for a moment. So with that in mind, what would it feel like to be making choices every day that were congruent, that were in alignment with that way of feeling? Now it's a challenge because we all get caught up in the busyness of life, don't we? We've got things to do, we have work to accomplish, we have relationships to take care of, we've got houses to clean, we got all sorts of stuff. It's really easy not to be thinking about what our choices contribute to that world without discord. And yet, it is in that moment of thinking about it that our power really lies. So first the awareness, but then the actual taking action. Right? Science of mind, our teaching, recognizes that power is a fundamental dimension of the divine and that we access that power as individualized expressions of God. We're called to stand in our power as an expression of truth and to think about what that looks like in the practical application of our power to create and enhance more life. So it doesn't mean that we ignore what's going on, right, or do spiritual bypass. It means that we choose to stand in an awareness of power. And that requires from us not simply having the idea or the awareness, but the commitment to take action. And that's the hard part, right? That's sort of the spiritual practice part. It's the commitment. Have you ever intended to pursue a spiritual practice? Like, when I get up, I'm going to take 15 minutes to meditate. And then the alarm doesn't go off, or you wake up and you don't. And you think, well, I'll do it next time. And yet it's that moment of choice that can change what's going to happen for you both in that moment and for the rest of the day. So I simply acknowledge our humanness, mine too, and want to invite you to think about really pushing forward into that. Because the truth is that we as human beings have an amazing and transformative potential in this power that resides within us and can be exercised when we remember that, right? So at this foundation of this divine within, this idea of power, is this idea that it is the very fundamental part of our being, right? It's never somewhere else. It's always right here where we are. And what does this look like as we get through the day? What happens when we make a choice? Rob Bell says this: what would it look like for you to approach tomorrow with a sense of honor and privilege, believing that you have work to do in the world, that it matters, that it's needed, that you have a path, and you are working on your craft, which is to say, the craft of being authentically who you are. How many people feel like they are authentically who they are every day? Sometimes, all right, maybe in moments, and some people feel like that more than others. Does that sound like a good way to feel? Yeah, I think so too. But so many things feel like they get in the way, don't they? It is easy to feel that as a single person, it's hard to make a difference in life, right? What can you change as one person when there's so much that's going on, when there's so much difficulty, when there's so much suffering that we see all the time? What can one person do? Well, I'm going to share a story of someone you all know, I'm sure, who was one person who made a choice that made a gigantic difference. So, does everyone recognize who this is? This is Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks is an African-American woman who one day in December of 1955 was going home from work. And she lived in Montgomery, Alabama. And at that time, there were racial segregation laws that dictated that when there were the white people who sat on the bus, when they exceeded the area designated for them, that the African Americans would have to move, would have to give up their seats for those white people. And it so happened on that day that the bus filled up and the bus driver instructed her to give up her seat to a white passenger. And she very calmly and politely said no. And she was arrested. And that choice in that moment and that arrest ignited what became the civil rights movement. It led to a boycott of the buses that lasted for over a year, right? That was led by Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. And as this began a whole movement to secure civil rights and ultimately led to a Supreme Court decision outlawing segregation in public transportation as being unconstitutional. But Rosa Parks did not get on the bus that day with the intention to inspire a civil rights movement. She got on the bus that day to go home, right? But in that moment, something in her called her to take action from her own authenticity, right? From her own integrity, from her belief that she was a whole human being, just like everybody else on that bus. And I want to invite you to think about the possibility, not that you have to have the goal to change the world in every action that you take, but to have the awareness that even a very simple action can ripple through our community and our world and create a positive change, right? Just like President Carter's choice to work on Habitat for Humanity contributes to housing, but also inspires people to take action in their communities, to be volunteers and to be of service. You can take an individual action that changes people's lives or even just your own. All right, so there's sort of both a giving and receiving part of this. So has anybody ever been the recipient of a kind gesture? Raise your hand. Yeah, we all have. Has anybody ever just decided to offer a kind gesture to someone they don't know? Yeah, we've all done that too. How does it feel when you do that? It feels good, doesn't it? It feels good to receive the kindness of strangers, and it feels good to offer it. My husband and I were talking about this on the way here today, about doesn't it feel good when somebody lets you merge into traffic? Right? I mean, there's that moment of appreciation. There's that moment of gratitude. Wow, thank you. I really appreciate that. Right? And we even wave, right? Like to express that thank you. And it feels good then to let other people into the traffic too. When I was a little girl, I had an experience that really made an impression on me about the power of kindness, of unexpected kindness. Our dog got out of the house one night. My parents were out. We had a babysitter. It was dark. Couldn't find him. We kind of walked around the neighborhood, couldn't find him. And gone all night. In the morning we discovered, we got a call from the police. We lived in a small town. So in that small town, the police would call you when something happened. He'd been hit by a car in the night. And they called us because he had a tag on, so they could look us up and call us. The person who hit our dog took him to the vet in the middle of the night. This was a small town, so the vet's office wasn't open, but the vet lived at the office. And so he got up in the middle of the night, and nobody worried about who was going to pay for that vet care. He just took care of our dog who had a broken hip. And our dog had to stay at the vet for a month, but eventually he was able to come home and lived another 10 years with us. How amazing. I thought as a child that this person who had no connection to us, right, just chose to do something incredibly kind because they could, right? And that's something that I have carried with me all my life. The idea of choice in being kind. And I'm not saying that you have to, pay hundreds of dollars to take care of somebody else's dog. Simply that in every moment we have choice about what we might do or not do. I read a Facebook post recently by a woman who was talking about how meaningful both receiving kindness and offering kindness were to her. And she gave a couple of really wonderful examples. One was that she was at the supermarket one day and there was a young woman with 3 small children at the checkout, including a baby, and the baby was fussy and the kids were cranky, and it's kind of the end of the day. And the woman said, I offered to hold the baby so that the mother could get through the checkout line. And the baby calmed down and the kids calmed down. And she said, it was just a moment, but the person who offered that kindness, it has stayed with her, that she was able to do something. It's that sense of exercising that power that you have, right? And she recounted another instance where her car broke down and someone, a stranger, stopped and helped her. And she was so grateful, right, to receive a kindness. We all have that capacity to exercise kindness every day. We don't have to be Rosa Parks. We don't have to be President Carter. We don't have to be Jose Andres, the founder of World Central Kitchen, a wonderful organization that is out there feeding people in disaster sites and war sites and taking care of them. And it's wonderful that they have the means and the capacity to do that. And yet, what would our world look like if we chose to exercise that capacity for kindness, both to accept it and to offer it? Can you imagine that we could achieve a world without discord? What do you think? Maybe? Maybe more so, at least? Yeah, maybe more so. Right? We have the power to change the world with a single decision. And I know we don't walk around every day thinking about that power. And yet, that power resides within us. So I want to invite you to think about using your power intentionally for good. Yeah? Using your power for good. So Ernest Holmes says, we must understand that it is a power for good, and we must realize that this power flows through us and that the instrument of this power is our own mind. We must begin right where we are because there is no other place we could be. Right? How and where can I use my power for good? What if we started every day with that question, or as one of the questions that we might ask ourselves? How and where can I use my power for good today? I think it's really important as we think about that to remember that using your power for good, right, is not a selfish act, right? It's both an act that can be beneficial to ourselves, but that we're doing that as a really essential aspect of our spiritual journey. You know, sometimes we like to use the metaphor in our teaching of a spiral, right, as the visual example of our spiritual journey. And what's really important in the idea of that spiral is that sense of continuing growth, right? As we move through the spiral that is ever expanding and enlarging, what we know is that we are growing. And the more that we grow, right, every time we take an action for the good, right, that creates the opportunity for more. There is always something greater yet to experience, yet to witness, yet to observe. And that is both something greater for ourselves as individuals, but also something greater for us in community, together. There is something more, and we can choose to be a part of that something more. So how can you practice bringing your authentic self to the world? All right, what do you think these people are doing? What does it look like? Yeah, picking up trash at the beach. That's a really San Diego thing, isn't it? I've done it with my daughter's Girl Scout troop when she was a kid, and with other community organizations, right? That's something as a form of community service that we can all appreciate living here. And I'm sure that everyone here in the sanctuary, everybody joining us online, participates in other kinds of community service that are so important, that are part of making our world a better place. So what are some other kinds of things we can be doing? You know, I want to invite you to think about the power of something very simple. What if you looked in the eyes of every person that you met one day and smiled? Right? You didn't have to fix anything. You didn't have to pay any money. You didn't have to do anything but smile. See them and smile. Don't we all yearn to be seen as human beings? What a powerful thing we can offer each other that doesn't cost anything except our attention, our remembering to do that. Speaking kindly to others, right? I'm sure that you never do this. Do I sometimes get sort of caught up in everything and maybe a little cranky and speak a little shortly? I'm sure that you never do that, but you know, I think about that sometimes, like, oops, I need to step back. I need to step out of the busyness and think about how I can be connecting and making what I am experiencing to be in congruence with what I believe, because I believe in love, right? But are my actions congruent with that belief? I believe in peace. Are my actions congruent with that peace? The more my choices are in alignment with those values, the more that's what I create in my physical manifest experience. And that power we all have, all the time, right? So I want to invite you just to take a moment, close your eyes again, and just think about what is an action you could take this week that would be in alignment with what you believe, that would be in alignment with love, with peace, with abundance, with joy. What is an action that you could take this week? All right, once you've got that idea, now I want you to take it a step further. I want to invite you to make a commitment to yourself to actually do that thing. So we start with the idea, that's great, but now we have to go to the next place, which is the commitment, because that's where the work is. All right, here's the final part of this invitation, that you come back next week and share what you did. Are you up for that? Yeah. All right. Okay. I'll look forward to hearing about what those were. So Emmett Fox shares in his essay, The Sermon on the Mount, that Jesus tells us not to be discouraged because we do not overcome everything at once, or because our progress seems to be slow. I don't know about you, but I am sometimes an incredibly impatient person. And I feel frustrated when things don't happen right away, right? Like, oh, I have found this amazing spiritual teaching. That means my life is going to be perfect now, right? And, 20 years in, I can absolutely tell you that it's a lot better, but I wouldn't call it perfect yet. And what it has taken me a long time to realize is that there is never a perfect, right? Is that this process of growth, this spiritual journey doesn't have an end. You don't get to the perfect place, because the perfect place is simply that you continue to grow. And the exciting thing about that, right, is that there is always a greater yet to be that you haven't thought of yet, but you get to a place where you can imagine, oh, what if things were like this? What, right? How amazing is that, right? And the 20-year-ago me did not have the self-awareness or the insight or the capability to imagine that greater yet to be that I can see now. So how exciting is that, to keep thinking about what more is there? And there is so much more good for all of us to experience as individuals and as communities, all together. I think that it is something so powerful. Emmett Fox goes on to say, if we are moving, if things are improving, even though not very quickly, we have no need to be discouraged. We need only to work on steadily, and provided we are wholehearted in our efforts, we will surely be fulfilled. Right? So what is required? Being wholehearted and keeping on, right? And here's the great thing about being in community, is that you can do that with other people. When you get discouraged on the way, and hey, we're human beings, so that is a natural thing that happens, right? You can come and talk with our practitioners or our ministers, right? We can support you with prayer, we can support you with encouragement, and our community collectively can support each other, right? Because ultimately, we're all in it together, whether we imagine so or not, right? I work as a chaplain at UCSD in palliative care, and I meet with people every day. And I can share with you that it is so hard to go through a serious illness by yourself, right? It is so transformative to have support. And whether that support is a biological family or a chosen family or a community, it makes a huge difference. part of what we try to do with the team that I work with is to create a little community, right? A kind of micro support community for our patients. But we know that we all have choice in choosing to live in community and how we live in community. And the benefit of that is both in this giving and receiving that we've been talking about this morning, right? Both in offering that kindness, that help, that support, and also in saying yes to it, in embracing it. You know, Reverend Angela talked about that idea of embracing the good that is already within you, right? As such a fundamental part of our own individual growth. And when we embrace that, when we say yes, we also open up the space to say yes to all the good that is around us, right? And to contribute to that good. Life is not a spectator sport, even though it's easy to forget that when we're looking at social media. You know, it's easy to go down the rabbit hole of watching all this other stuff happening in other people's lives or watching streaming TV. And don't get me wrong, I love British mysteries. Yeah. But our life is not those images. Our life is here in our physical, manifest experience. And we have a choice about what we experience and how we experience it. So let us embrace this gift of our personal power and fearlessly wield it in service of the greater good. Okay? As we act with love and integrity and compassion, we uplift ourselves and others. And that allows us to leave an amazing, transformative, uplifting imprint on our own lives and everyone else's that we touch. So please join me in doing this together. And I'm going to invite you to join me in an affirmation. So please stand up. We're going to do it the way we like to do it here at Eckholm. We're going to say it quietly, we're going to say it boldly, and then we're going to shout it out to the universe, okay? So, I stand in my power as a presence for God and for good. I stand in my power as a presence for God and for good. I stand in my power as a presence for God and for good. Thank you. Namaste.